On a Thursday night in October, a 44-year-old ultrasound technician named Renee sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open to a blank spreadsheet, a cold cup of coffee, and a legal pad she'd already filled with crossed-out numbers, most of them abandoned halfway through since she kept second-guessing an assumption and starting over. Her husband had gone to bed an hour earlier, telling her not to stay up too late again over the math thing. She wasn't quitting her job that night. She wasn't calling her boss in the morning. She was doing something smaller, and it turned out far more consequential. She was checking 6 specific things, one at a time, to find out whether the number in her brokerage account actually meant what she hoped it meant. By 11:15, she had her answer. Not someday, not if the market cooperates. 2 years, give or take a few months, but close enough to circle a date on the calendar and mean it. Close enough that she went back and checked her math twice more before she let herself believe it. I'm going to walk you through the exact 6 things she checked, in the exact order she checked them. Most of what you've heard about signs you're ready to retire is either too vague to act on or borrowed from someone 20 years older than you with a pension you don't have. These 6 are specific. You can check every one of them tonight, on your own numbers, before you go to bed. The first thing she checked wasn't her balance. It was her balance's paycheck. Here's what almost nobody explains about a portfolio once it gets large enough. At some point, the money itself starts earning more in a year than you spend in a year. Not eventually, in some vague future sense that only applies to other people with better jobs or richer parents. Literally. As a dollar figure this year, sitting right there in the account, whether anyone bothers to check it or not. Renee's portfolio was $1,125,000. At a long-run average return of 7%, the return most diversified portfolios have delivered over any 20 or 30-year stretch in modern market history. That portfolio was on track to grow by about $78,750 over the next 12 months. That's without her contributing a single additional dollar. Her annual spending, tracked carefully for years out of habit rather than anxiety, was $58,000. The math wasn't close. Her money was on pace to earn $20,750 more than her entire cost of living every year, whether she showed up to a shift at the hospital or not. Here's where the 2-year number actually comes from. I don't want you taking it on faith any more than Renee did. To fully retire under a standard 4% withdrawal rule, she needed 25 times her annual spending, which put her real target at $1,450,000. Between her portfolio's own growth and the $72,000 a year she and her husband were still adding, that gap closed almost entirely within 2 years. It landed just a couple $1,000s short of the finish line, close enough that a decent quarter in the market or a small raise would cover the rest. That's the whole trick behind the headline. It was never a guess. It was arithmetic she could run again herself, any night she wanted to double-check it. This is the single most reliable early signal that retirement has stopped being a hypothetical and started being a math problem with an actual due date. And almost nobody checks it. Almost nobody realizes it's a number you can check. It requires exactly 2 pieces of information you probably already have sitting in an app on your phone: what your accounts are worth and what you spend in a year. The second thing she checked was how much room she had to be wrong. A lot of retirement content stops at the 4% rule, which says you can safely withdraw 4% of your portfolio each year without running out of money over a normal length retirement. Renee's 4% number was $45,000 a year. But she didn't stop there, because a safe withdrawal number that exactly matches your spending gives you 0 room for a bad year, a surprise expense, or simple human error. Life has a way of producing at least one of those 3 within any given 12 months. She separated her spending into 2 buckets, the way a good accountant would, but doing it herself at her own kitchen table instead of paying someone to tell her what she already half knew. Essential costs, the things that don't move even in a rough year: housing, food, insurance, utilities. That number was $24,000. Everything else, travel, gifts, the parts of life that make it worth living but can flex if it needs to, made up the rest. Her essential costs were only 53% of her safe withdrawal amount, which meant she had roughly $21,000 of genuine slack built into the plan before she'd ever have to touch the flexible stuff, let alone panic and start second-guessing a decision she'd already made. This is the check most people skip entirely, and it's the difference between a plan that survives contact with a bad year and one that doesn't. If your essential costs eat up nearly all of your 4% number, you don't have a retirement plan. You have a plan that works exactly as long as nothing ever goes wrong, which is not a plan. It's a hope wearing a spreadsheet as a costume. Hopes don't hold up well against a bad transmission or an unplanned trip to the emergency room. The third thing she checked was uglier, and it's the one most people are too scared to run. What happens to the plan if the market has 2 bad years right when you need the money most? Not a gentle dip, a real one. The kind that makes the evening news and makes everyone's retirement account app feel like something you'd rather not open for a while. Renee modeled 2 consecutive years of 15% market losses, starting the very first year she'd be retired, while still withdrawing her full $58,000 to live on. After the first bad year, her portfolio fell to $898,250. After the second, $705,512. Still enormous, still functioning exactly the way it needed to. Still comfortably able to cover both her essential costs and most of the flexible spending without touching a single decision she'd made before the downturn hit. She ran the same scenario for a hypothetical version of herself with only $500,000 saved instead of $1,125,000, and that version ended the same 2 years at $253,950, less than half of what she started with and closing in fast on real trouble. The difference between those two outcomes isn't luck. It's the size of the cushion before the storm hits. Nothing more mysterious than that. This is called sequence of returns risk in financial planning circles, and it's the single scariest, least discussed variable in early retirement. A bad market in year 1 of retirement does dramatically more damage than the identical bad market showing up in year 15, once you're already withdrawing money instead of adding to it. If you've never modeled 2 consecutive bad years against your own number, you don't actually know if your plan works. You know if it works when nothing goes wrong, and something always eventually goes wrong, usually not on a schedule that's convenient for anyone. The fourth thing she checked wasn't about her portfolio at all. It was about a phone call she hadn't made yet. Healthcare. Specifically, the gap between whenever you plan to stop working and whenever Medicare eligibility kicks in at 65. This single line item quietly wrecks more early retirement plans than a bad market ever does. People build a beautiful spreadsheet full of growth rates and withdrawal percentages, then treat health insurance as a rounding error they'll figure out later, somewhere down the road, once they need it. Renee actually called and got real quotes for an ACA marketplace plan at her post-retirement income level before she finalized anything, sitting on hold for 40 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon between patients. It wasn't free, and it wasn't nothing. Depending on the state and the specific plan, premiums for a household in her situation can run anywhere from a few hundred to well over $1,000 a month. The number changes based on income too, in ways that reward keeping your reported income lower in the early retirement years. Whatever the exact figure turned out to be for her, it was a real number, verified, sitting in her spreadsheet next to everything else instead of floating somewhere in the vague future as "I'll deal with it." That's the entire check, not whether healthcare is expensive. It obviously is. Whether you've actually priced it for your specific situation, your specific state, your specific household, instead of assuming it'll work itself out. The same casual optimism that sinks more early retirement plans than any market crash on record. The fifth thing she checked, she almost didn't think to check at all because it wasn't a number sitting in an account. It was a pattern spread across 5 years of pay stubs. 5 years earlier, Renee earned $92,000 and spent $54,000, a 41% savings rate that already put her ahead of most people her age. In the years since, her income climbed to $130,000, a 41% raise driven by a promotion and a couple of solid annual increases. Her spending over that same stretch moved from $54,000 to $58,000, a 7% increase. Almost nothing, barely enough to notice against inflation alone. Most people's spending rises right alongside their income, quietly. A nicer car here, a bigger place there, until a raise barely moves the needle on how much they're able to save. The whole thing gets rationalized as living a little or finally being able to afford it. Renee's savings rate climbed from 41% to 55% without her consciously deciding to live more frugally at any point, without a single dramatic budget overhaul or a New Year's resolution that fizzled out by February. She just never let her spending catch up to her paychecks, and that one unremarkable habit, repeated for 5 ordinary years, is doing more work in this entire story than any single investment decision she ever made. This sign matters. It's the one that predicts the future instead of just measuring the present. A portfolio number tells you where you are today. A flat spending line next to a rising income tells you whether the gap between what you earn and what you need keeps widening on its own. That's exactly the engine that turned Renee's decade of saving into a 2-year countdown instead of a 15-year one. If your spending has quietly kept pace with every raise you've ever gotten, this is the sign most worth revisiting. It's also the one you have the most direct control over changing, starting tomorrow morning. The 6th thing she checked lying in bed, and it had nothing to do with money at all. She pictured an ordinary Tuesday, 8 months into retirement, with genuinely nothing scheduled. No shift, no appointment, no reason to set an alarm, no coworkers texting about a scheduling conflict, no sense of being needed anywhere by anyone before 10 in the morning, no reason to even glance at the clock. And she asked herself, honestly, whether that Tuesday sounded like relief or like the beginning of a slow, quiet kind of dread she wouldn't want to admit to out loud. This sounds soft compared to 5 numbers in a spreadsheet, but researchers who study retirement satisfaction have found that a meaningful share of people who retire early, financially secure by every measure, end up going back to some form of work within a couple of years. Not because the money ran out, because they hadn't actually rehearsed the identity shift underneath the financial one. Work gives most people structure, purpose, and a social world they don't replace just because they technically don't need the paycheck anymore. Losing all 3 at once, on the same random Tuesday, tends to hit harder than anyone expects while they're still working and dreaming about the alternative. If picturing that empty Tuesday makes you uneasy instead of excited, that's not a reason to abandon the plan. It's a reason to build something into year 1 that isn't just an absence of work, a project, a volunteer commitment, a part-time version of something you enjoy. A number that's ready and a person who isn't will find a way to spend the difference, usually on something expensive and unplanned that fills the silence. Notice what happened across those 6 checks. The order wasn't random, and none of it happened by accident. The first 3 are pure arithmetic. What your money earns, how much room you have if you're wrong, and what survives if the market turns on you right when it matters most. The 4th closes the single biggest hole people leave open by accident. The 5th explains how she got here in the first place and predicts whether the gap keeps closing on its own or stalls out the moment life gets a little more expensive. And the 6th is the only one that isn't about money at all, which is exactly why it's the one most spreadsheets never include, and exactly why skipping it sinks otherwise perfectly funded plans more often than anyone in this space likes to admit. Before I tell you Renee's plan worked out exactly as she calculated it, I have to be honest about what these 6 checks don't cover. A video that only shows you the version where the math cooperates isn't giving you the full picture. The 7% return is a long-run average, not a promise for any specific 2-year window. And Renee got a little lucky that the market didn't hand her a rough stretch during the exact 2 years she was counting on. The stress test in sign 3 shows her plan surviving a bad sequence, but it doesn't guarantee against every possible sequence, and nobody can build a spreadsheet that does. Her healthcare number was accurate the day she called, but premiums change every year, sometimes by a lot, and that number needs rechecking annually, not just once before you make the leap. And her essential versus discretionary math only holds if she's honest with herself about which bucket things actually belong in, because it's remarkably easy to quietly reclassify a want as a need once you're staring down a departure date you're excited about. Renee caught herself doing exactly that one night, halfway through moving a $200 wine club membership from flexible into essential before she laughed at herself, deleted the edit, and put it back where it honestly belonged. None of that makes the 6 checks less useful. It makes them a snapshot you have to keep retaking, not a verdict you get to file away and forget about. Renee didn't run these numbers once and walk away. She reran all 6 of them every few months between that October night and the date she'd circled. She watched the gap close, adjusted when a bill came in higher than expected, and stayed honest with herself the entire way, instead of just believing the first spreadsheet that told her what she wanted to hear. There's a particular kind of discipline in that, the willingness to keep checking your own good news for cracks instead of just enjoying it. And it's rarer than the discipline it took to save the money in the first place. 6 checks, 5 numbers, and 1 honest conversation with yourself in the dark. None of them require a financial advisor, a subscription, or a spreadsheet template someone's selling you. They require your actual account balances, your actual spending, and about 90 honest minutes, ideally on a night when nobody's waiting on you to come to bed. Renee didn't quit her job that Thursday night. She did something quieter and, in its own way, harder. She closed the laptop, rinsed out the cold coffee cup, and went to bed next to her husband, who woke up briefly and asked, half asleep, whether she'd figured it out. She told him yes, and then had to explain, in the dark, at almost midnight, that yes meant something specific now, not the vague yes she'd been saying for years whenever anyone asked when she thought she'd retire. She circled a date roughly 2 years out, told exactly 3 people, and kept working her regular shifts at the hospital the next morning like nothing had changed, because on the outside, nothing had. Her co-workers had no idea. Her patients had no idea. The only thing different was that she now knew, with real numbers behind it instead of a feeling, that the date on the calendar was true. She carried that knowledge quietly through 2 more years of ordinary Tuesdays, the good ones and the exhausting ones, all the way to the one that finally arrived exactly when the math said it would. If you run these same 6 checks on your own numbers tonight, and every single one comes back clean, you're not looking at a dream anymore. You're looking at a due date, an actual one, sitting on your own calendar instead of someone else's, waiting for you to be brave enough to write it down in pen instead of pencil. And if 1 or 2 of them come back shaky, that's not bad news either. That's the actual list of what to work on next. A concrete, specific, solvable list. Not a vague, anxious sense that retirement is something that happens to other people in some other decade, with some other set of numbers that never quite seem to be yours. The numbers were always going to be yours. Most people just never sit down long enough on a quiet enough night to actually check.